You are listening to The Tarot Diagnosis. I'm your host, Shannon. I'm a licensed psychotherapist, and I also happen to have a love for tarot. Each episode, I invite you to reflect with me as I work to demystify the tarot and the human experience, all while exploring tarot's connection to mental and emotional health. While this podcast may feel therapeutic, it is not meant to take the place of psychotherapy. So grab your cards and join me as I work to create a pathway to better understand ourselves and those around us. I had such an epiphany a few days ago after pulling the Three of Cups. It led me down this incredibly reflective, nostalgic road. And I was thinking about the feeling that I have when I'm in the middle of a crowd at a concert, or back in the day when I'd wait in line for hours with other people, other strangers, just to be front and center of the stage at the barricade. It was always such a euphoric feeling, everyone sharing in that same excitement and joy at the same moment in time for the same reason. And then it hit me. The Three of Cups is collective effervescence. So, what even is collective effervescence? It's a term that was originally introduced by a sociologist, Emil Durkheim, who described this kind of intense, shared emotional experience that emerges when people gather in rituals, celebrations, demonstrations, or any other sort of kind of collective event. And during these experiences, folks participate in the same ideas and emotions or actions at the same time, which then kind of generates this heightened sense of energy among them. And it's this shared emotional intensity that ends up strengthening these kind of social bonds and creates this feeling of unity within a group without even speaking to each other, which I think is the coolest part. So, I mean, even to be as succinct as possible, this concept of collective effervescence is basically just shared joy, shared euphoria, shared energy. And it's interesting because as I was reflecting on this through this card, I realized the majority of my happy memories growing up are rooted in collective effervescence. In fact, I even remember this one specific time. All of my my whole life, starting at age or adolescence, I should say, from 12 until 20, I was very deeply rooted in the music scene. I was a music journalist for many years. If anyone's ever seen the movie Almost Famous, where the kid's like 15 and he's like backstage writing for Rolling Stone, that was basically my life. I had all these relationships with these with these PR people. No one knew that I was 15 years old. I'm on these tour buses interviewing these musicians. It was literally an insane time of my life, but an incredible time. But so all of my really happy memories of my youth involve music. And I remember this one time I was at a Seven Dust concert, and I'm in the middle of the crowd. I actually wasn't up on the barricade this time, but I'm in the middle of the crowd, and there's a very particular vocal solo done by the drummer in one of their songs. And it's a really kind of powerful part of the song because the music just kind of stops and it's just the drummer just, having his solo moment. And, so in this experience, I'm at this concert and this, particular vocal solo is happening, and me and this girl next to me who is a complete stranger, we just look at each other and suddenly start just like totally rocking out, singing every lyric to this particular part to each other. And it was like we had kind of like created our own little like mosh pit circle. And we were just like in this like shared, very kind of unique moment. And the energy was just buzzing. And it was like I had tunnel vision. I'm just seeing the band, and I'm seeing these bodies around us, and I'm just seeing her, and we're having this shared experience. And I mean, this was probably 20 years ago at this point, but I remember it so vividly. And neither of us exchanged any words or anything with each other. I don't know her name. I don't know anything about her. We had that one moment and then we, went on enjoying the concert, after that. And yeah, it was just a moment of, collective effervescence that brought us together and that, stuck with me all these years. But yeah, so that's my kind of like personal example of that. But, so I was reflecting on this and then, I'm a therapist. So I'm also thinking about how, what this means from a therapeutic standpoint, from a psychological standpoint. And I was also thinking about how even though this collective effervescence is a collective experience, I also think it's important to note that while this experience, this feeling can be really euphoric and exciting sometimes for some people, there are other times and for other people where it is absolutely dreadful. So I guess just I want you to keep in mind, while this is a collective phenomena, it's not necessarily universal. So if you're listening to this and you are like, oh my God, I hate this experience, you're probably not alone. And if you want to keep listening to this episode, that's great. And if you don't, that's okay too. But yeah, I just felt like it was important to say that. So if you're listening and you're like, oh my gosh, I don't like this, there's absolutely nothing wrong with you. Some people really enjoy this and some people don't. But this was all really inspired by me pulling the Three of Cups. And, I was thinking about the Three of Cups and how we often read it so lightly. We often just kind of quickly say, oh, it's a moment of celebration. It's friendship. It's joy. It's community. There's these, three people kind of like happily, cheersing, raising their cups together. They're, laughing, just feeling really joyful. But yeah, I just think that there's so much more depth to this card now than we really give it credit for. There's this incredibly deep emotional amplification of shared joy, of a creation of energy among multiple people that can only be created among multiple people. This cannot necessarily be replicated on an individual level. It's really about togetherness, which now that I've said that later on in the episode, I will probably contradict myself because there's something else that I want to say about togetherness versus isolation. But at its core, it really is about the energy that is exchanged and created among multiple people at the same time in the same place. And, I was thinking about kind of the progression from the cups where, we started the Ace of Cups and, that, we typically feel this kind of singular emotional, overflow. And then we move to the Two of Cups, which really centers a relationship among, two people, this kind of shared intimacy, projection and mirroring. But then the Three of Cups is really where we start to become introduced to the group dynamic. And I feel like there's plenty of relationship dynamics in the tarot, but we really don't focus enough on this group dynamic in the Three of Cups because it really is where emotion becomes this kind of shared social experience that is unlike any experience that we can have individually or even just with one other person. So there's lots of research out there on this topic. And if this is something that you're interested in, highly recommend hopping on like Google Scholar, for example, and just typing in collective effervescence. Lots of good stuff there. And a lot of the research that's out there really shows that when people gather, especially in, dense, lively environments, something really cool happens. And I'll link some of the studies in the show notes, but there was one study that measured like biometrics of people in these environments. And it showed that their emotions and physical reactions synchronize. So heart rates rise and fall together. Attention is very aligned. Affect kind of, spreads across everybody. And it's a very specific moment and experience that happens only when all of these people are gathered at the same place at the same time, having this kind of joyous moment. And I think the Three of Cups just captures that so perfectly. I don't know if any other card really does. You have the Four of Wands, maybe, but it's just two people. Actually, I think the Six of Wands could capture this, but I'm mildly hesitant with the Six of Wands because it does showcase this person, elevated on this horse, the person who's being celebrated. But, we don't necessarily have to take that literally. Like the Six of Wands very much could be like that concert experience where, the crowd is all gathered and, loving that they're getting to see their artist on stage. So I think I still don't have that same kind of like gut reaction to the Six of Wands when I'm thinking about collective effervescence as I do with the Three of Cups. But I do think the experience of collective effervescence could still exist and likely does exist within the Six of Wands. But I really think that it's the highlight of the Three of Cups. Something else that's really cool about this concept is a lot of the research really shows that to have this euphoric experience, you don't need to be in deep conversation. You don't even need to have the same shared beliefs. There doesn't need to be any sort of even direct interaction with anybody around you. It's really just the experience of being in the crowd, moving through the same space, responding to the same stimuli that is enough for the euphoria and joy and excitement of collective effervescence to emerge for folks. And I think that this explains why shared experiences feel more intense than solitary ones. So a great example of this is watching a concert on TV by yourself on your couch versus experiencing that same concert in a crowd in person. The artist is the same. It's the same exact concert. The same artist, the same music, the same songs, the same lighting, but you're sitting on your couch alone. You're still experiencing the same concert. It's just you are not there in person with the crowd. And now let's say you had that same concert, but it was a private concert and you are the only attendee. You are not going to have that same emotional experience that you would if a crowd were there. And I think that's a really important distinction when we're talking about these feelings. And, I'm using music and concerts as an example just because I feel like that's the easiest. It's the one that I resonate with the most. But we could also think about this in terms of ritual work. So, the ritual work that we might do alone in private can be super grounding and feel really great. But when it's performed in a group or collectively, it can feel supernatural. And even just, the experience of laughing. Let's say you're watching, a comedy show on Netflix and, you're laughing at it. It's a pleasant moment, but you're alone. You don't even have to be in person at this comedy event. You bring a group of friends over and you're all sitting around and you're watching that same comedy bit. And now you have the shared laughter. And suddenly the emotional experience feels electric. It's night and day, so different. That's collective effervescence. And from a psychological perspective, this happens because as humans, we're designed to co-regulate. We're designed to attune to one another. We're designed to mirror each other very naturally. Think about in relationships, you just naturally start to mirror your partner or your friend. You pick up their little, ways they speak, their mannerisms sometimes. And I think the Three of Cups really reflects that as well. This kind of nervous system resonating together, creating this sense of belonging that is both emotional and physical. And this is really why people report feeling higher levels of meaning, increased joy, overall just satisfaction and well-being after that they've been in some sort of collective experience. And again, I want to reiterate and go back, not everyone has this. So while some people report higher levels of meaning and joy and well-being, other people might feel completely depleted. And, it might not be like this for everyone for every collective event. And, while all of this sounds like, such good vibes, sounds like a great time, there's also a shadow side to collective effervescence that I feel like does not get enough attention. Because, the reality is, knowledge of this type of experience in the wrong hands can totally be used to manipulate and entrap. So, think high control religions, cults, any sort of like authoritarian group that really relies heavily on collective effervescence to keep people loyal, to keep them unquestioning, because that shared kind of group euphoria can be blinding to what's really happening around them. So, rituals, chants, music, any sort of like synchronized movement, emotional testimony, very tightly packed gatherings, all heighten arousal and bonding. When people feel like they're on fire together, they're just like, they're electric, that feeling can be misattributed to divinity, moral superiority, to like truth. And then the group, begins to feel sacred, and leaving it can feel like a betrayal or terrifying. And just like in addiction, the withdrawal of that can be incredibly painful emotionally and physically. So if we're looking at this through the lens of tarot and the Three of Cups, this kind of shadow, or the shadow of collective effervescence, is the Three of Cups, I would say maybe reversed or without any sort of actual discernment. It could also look like and sound like weaponized joy, weaponized community, belonging and care, because in these types of groups, belonging is conditional, and emotional highs can be followed by shame and fear and isolation if anyone questions the group. And so these types of places really rely on that collective gathering and that euphoria and that energy of each other, because, it's intoxicating and distracting. It distracts them from what's actually happening. And this is why understanding the shadow of collective effervescence is really important, because, without the awareness of that, you're mesmerized, and people can confuse that experience of emotional intensity with, something like collective integrity, or easily confuse the community that they're belonging to as a sense of safety. And yeah, so in this case, the Three of Cups reminds us that shared joy, yes, can be incredibly powerful and healing and energizing, but without, discernment, and curiosity, it can be pretty damaging. But beyond the Three of Cups kind of reigniting my fascination with this experience, I've realized something else. And this is where earlier I was like, ooh, I might actually contradict myself when I said that this has to be something that collective effervescence can't be experienced from a solitary perspective. But yeah, my contradiction here is that I think tarot itself is or can be a catalyst for collective effervescence. And that's wild because most of the time we're engaging with tarot alone. And so this is where I'm, treading into contradictory territory. But if you think about it, tarot somehow manages to unify all of us, even though we're not in the same room, not even in the same city, likely don't even have the same belief system. I think about kind of this intersection that I hang out at. I'm very much kind of like immersed in this like the witchcraft, tarot, spiritual side of things, yet I experience this and view this from a place of practice and ritual versus belief. So I'm not someone who believes in or works with gods and deities. I have a very secular approach to my work, yet I can have this collective effervescence experience about the power in the collective unconscious and the synchronicity of tarot. Because, when we sit down to shuffle, we're doing something deeply solitary, yet, we're not necessarily doing something isolated because we're tapping into that collective unconscious. We're tapping into that shared symbolic language that has been handled and interpreted and projected onto and emotionally invested in by countless people before us. And, with tarot, collective effervescence doesn't necessarily require that physical proximity because it really is steeped in shared meaning and collective energy. And it's because of that, tarot carries, centuries of human attempts to understand the human experience, understand power, loss, desire, attachment, transformation, grief, joy, identity, all of the things. And even when we are alone at our altar, shuffling and pulling cards, we are still in conversation with and experiencing something communal. And yeah, I think that's one of the most magical things about tarot. So yeah, even in solitude, tarot creates a version of the collective effervescence of the Three of Cups. Thank you so much for listening to the Tarot Diagnosis. For more tarot and mental health content, follow the Tarot Diagnosis on Instagram. You can also subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode and sign up to receive the Tarot Diagnosis emails where you'll have access to exclusive spreads and exciting announcements. To join an incredible community of tarot and psychology enthusiasts, join the Tarot Diagnosis membership community, The Symposium, by visiting thetarotdiagnosis.com.